I just want to say thank you and good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I want to start off by saying that as a white male in South Africa, I initially thought that the discourse around diversity and the discussions that people are having was something that I really would be excluded from, something that held little meaning for me and something that I really couldn't contribute to. But over the past couple of months, I'm happy to say that I think I now understand. I understand that I have a role to play, and this role is assisting in driving the constructive changes that we're all working towards. As Masinyana said, I want to lead by example. So to be part of that change, I think personally, I needed to understand where and how I could improve as a human being, as a team member, and as a South African. So what I did was I took a few implicit association tests, and I wanted to measure my unconscious bias. What I found, and what most people find when they take these tests, is that despite the fact that I thought of myself as a progressive, highly tolerant and liberal person, I harbored significant unconscious biases in a range of different classes. So that led me to think, I need to understand unconscious bias, and our teams need to understand unconscious bias. So I did some research, and what I found was truly shocking. In the United States, research in 2017 showed that active disengagement by employees associated with a perception of bias costs American companies between $450 billion and $550 billion a year, larger than South Africa's GDP. This coupled with high rates of employee attrition and low rates of innovation provides a compelling case for addressing the implicit biases that most of us harbor. These unconscious biases exist at all levels of the organization and society, and they manifest themselves in hiring or promotion decisions, salary discussions, the way we compose our teams, and ultimately our organizational culture. So what can we as senior management do about bias? And at the same time, how do we promote diversity and inclusion? So the first step, I would say, is to understand what our biases are and how we need to address them. And here, I think awareness training becomes key because it allows people to recognize where they themselves harbor biases and how to address them. You need to diagnose the problem before you treat it. In a lot of our team meetings and a lot of our discussions that we have with our employees, we have a diversity moment where we bring up these issues. We bring up the issues of unconscious bias, and we tell people what the trigger points are and how to actively assess how their unconscious biases frames their decision making. I would also say at this point that the move towards a more diverse and inclusive workforce requires support and visible championing from the top. We should never underestimate the value that senior leadership can provide in diversity leadership. I would say personally, secondly, most companies these days have aspirations of being diverse and inclusive, but the question must be asked, are we just paying lip service to a paper tiger, or even worse, just trying to comply with the law? Or are we making real progress towards embedding diversity and inclusion in our culture? Setting goals and targets, using organizational data to calibrate and analyze our efforts, and holding managers accountable is key. These steps towards being a more diverse and inclusive workplace include making equity policies a priority. These objective criteria in the we also need to use objective criteria in recruitment, training, and promotion processes. And stepping back from this all, we need to look at ourselves and look at what we're doing. And we need to actively audit our performance in these areas and work towards creating a more sustainable framework. I think finally, practically embracing diversity and inclusion requires strong moves by leadership towards creating an environment that identifies and removes the barriers to diversity. If the decision-making powers are concentrated within one homogeneous group of individuals, how can you expect people who don't identify with that group to feel included? Senior managers should also be deliberate in their hiring practices and how they represent the organization in their decision-making structures. Hiring practices should also consider how the hiring process is done. For instance, is the net being cast wide enough to ensure that the pool of potential resources are diverse and representative? Are we only hiring people from tier 1 universities where previously disadvantaged individuals could not afford to go to or was well outside their region of attendance? You know, as Masinyane said again, it's time to ask people to dance. From a personal perspective, as a leader of a team of engineering professionals, I fully believe that promoting diversity goes both ways. While it is incredibly important to show diversity in our leadership styles, it is also important to become an advocate for diversity and inclusion. Leaders have a responsibility not only to their organizations, but to society at large to become activists in their own right. Again, like Masinyane said, I also have a quote from Dr. King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. So this is the time for us to speak up and to actively engage. I look forward to having further engagement with everybody after the presentations. Thank you very much.